Amarachi was barely 17 when she decided to ask the question that would change everything. She stood in the village square, her wrapper tied tight around her thin waist, watching the elders discuss the upcoming festival. The sun beat down on the red earth, but something cold settled in her stomach. "Why did my mother drown during dry season?" she asked, her voice cutting through their conversation. The elders turned to look at her. Elder Nduka, the most powerful among them, frowned deeply. His walking stick tapped against the ground 3 times. "She defied the gods," he said, his voice heavy with authority. "The spirits took her." But Amarachi had been thinking about this for months. Her mother, Obiajulu, had been a strong swimmer. Everyone knew this. The Ọma Mmiri River had been shallow that week, barely reaching a child's waist. But the water was low. She pressed on. Even children could stand in it. The other elders shifted uncomfortably. Women in the square began to whisper among themselves. "Mind your tongue, Amarachi," Elder Nduka warned, his eyes narrowing. "Some questions are better left unasked." But her tongue had teeth now. And her memory was sharp like her mother's cooking knife. She would not be silenced so easily. That night, the Ọma Mmiri River stopped singing. For as long as anyone could remember, the water had made gentle sounds as it flowed past the village. Children fell asleep to its lullabies. Fishermen used its rhythm to cast their nets. But now silence. Amarachi walked to the riverbank after dark, something pulling her toward the water. The moon reflected perfectly on the still surface, but something felt wrong. No frogs croaked. No crickets chirped. Even the palm trees stood motionless. She knelt by the water's edge and whispered, "Mama, are you there?" The river remained silent, but she felt watched. Back in the village, Elder Nduka paced in his compound. He had seen the girl by the water. Her questions were stirring up dust that had been buried for 3 years. "Dust becomes mud," he muttered to himself. "And mud clings to everything." He called for an emergency meeting with the other elders. Some things needed to be discussed in darkness, away from curious ears. The girl was becoming dangerous. Just like her mother had been. The next morning, Amarachi found her late mother's broken mirror while cleaning their small hut. It had been hidden beneath old wrappers in a wooden box. The glass was cracked down the middle, but still reflected images. She held it up to her face, expecting to see herself. Instead, only half her face appeared in the reflection. She blinked. The reflection didn't blink back. Her heart started beating faster. The face in the mirror looked exactly like her, but its mouth moved independently. "Run!" the reflection mouthed silently. Amarachi dropped the mirror, but it didn't break further. She picked it up again, hands trembling. This time, her normal reflection stared back. Maybe she was imagining things. Maybe grief was playing tricks on her mind. She wrapped the mirror carefully in cloth and hid it beneath her sleeping mat. But that night she dreamed of water crawling up her legs like living snakes. In the dream, the water whispered her mother's name over and over. When she woke, her legs were wet. But there was no water anywhere in the hut. At the morning market, a mad woman grabbed Amarachi's arm as she bought palm oil. The woman's eyes were wild, her hair matted with mud. Most people avoided her, thinking she was cursed. But her grip was surprisingly strong. "You're asking questions," the woman hissed, pulling Amarachi behind a stall. "The river is listening." Amarachi tried to pull away, but the woman held tight. "When they tied your mother's hands behind her back, did you think the river was blind?" the woman continued. "Water sees everything. Water remembers." "What do you mean tied her hands?" Amarachi asked, her voice shaking. The woman cackled loudly, then suddenly bent over and spat. A small fish fell from her mouth, still alive and gasping. It flapped on the dusty ground for a moment before being still. "Ask the river," the woman said, releasing Amarachi's arm. "It knows who pushed her in." Before Amarachi could ask more questions, the woman wandered away, talking to herself about fish and lies and water that never forgets. That night, the elders met under the great Iroko tree at the edge of the village. No drums announced their gathering. No palm wine was shared. Only whispered voices in the darkness. Elder Nduka stood in the center, his face grim in the moonlight. "She is her mother's echo," he said quietly. "Before she begins to scream the way Obiagela did, we must decide her fate." The other elders nodded. They remembered 3 years ago. They remembered Obiagela's accusations, her demands for truth, her threats to tell everyone what she had discovered. "The girl has the same fire," said Elder Okonkwo. "The same dangerous tongue." "What do you suggest?" asked Elder Emeka. Nduka's walking stick drew patterns in the dirt. "We silence her before she can speak what she doesn't know. Before she uncovers what should stay buried." They agreed. But the wind was stronger that night than any of them realized. It carried their words across the sleeping village, through open windows, past closed doors. And the river heard everything. The next morning, before the sun fully rose, angry voices woke Amarachi from sleep. She opened her door to find 3 women and 4 elders standing in her small compound. "You defiled the stream," Elder Nduka announced loudly, so the gathering crowd could hear. "You bathed naked in sacred waters." Amarachi's mouth fell open. "That's not true. I have never." "Silence!" Nduka struck his walking stick against the ground. 3 women saw you yesterday evening. They witnessed your shameful behavior." The 3 women nodded. Amarachi recognized them, Nkiru, Adiz, and Ugochi. They had been her mother's friends once. "Tell everyone what you saw," Nduka ordered. "We saw her removing her clothes by the river," Kira said, not meeting Amarachi's eyes. "She was singing strange songs to the water spirits," added Adiz. "Dancing naked like a mad woman," finished Ugochi. Even Amarachi's best friend, Chioma, looked at the ground and said nothing in her defense. No proof existed. Just lies. But lies repeated by many voices become truth in small villages. The village tribunal was quick. Too quick. Elder Nduka read the sentence as if it had been written long before the accusations. "You will spend 3 days and 3 nights by the riverside. No food. No speech. No comfort. This will let the river judge your soul." Amarachi felt the world spinning around her. "Please, I'm innocent. I never did those things." But rough hands were already tying her wrists with thick rope. They dragged her to the old mahogany tree that grew beside the Ọma Mmiri River. Only Mama Anwi, the blind priestess, raised her voice in protest. "The water sees clearer than men," she said, her cloudy eyes turned toward the river. "You are making a mistake." But the elders ignored her. They always ignored her these days. Her shrine was crumbling, her influence forgotten. They tied Amarachi to the tree as the sun climbed higher. Her mouth was bound with cloth to ensure her silence. 3 days, Nduka said, standing over her. "If you survive, the river has judged you innocent." He walked away without looking back. The first day passed slowly under the burning sun. Amarachi's wrists ached from the tight ropes. Her mouth was dry behind the cloth gag. But strange things began happening as evening approached. Rain clouds gathered overhead, but they released water only on her. While the rest of the riverbank remained dry, she was soaked by a gentle, warm rain. No birds flew past the tree where she sat. No insects crawled near her feet. Even the fish in the river seemed to avoid her section of the water. As night fell, the temperature dropped. But she felt warm, as if invisible arms were wrapping around her. Then she heard it, a voice from the water, soft and musical. "Why do you weep, daughter of salt?" Amarachi looked toward the river. The water glowed faintly in the moonlight, and she could swear she saw a figure moving beneath the surface. She tried to speak, but the cloth prevented any sound. Her tears fell silently. The voice came again, closer this time. "I know your pain, child. I have been waiting for you." The second night brought terror to the village. The Ọma Mmiri River turned red as blood. Children screamed when they saw it. Women refused to fetch water. Men gathered in groups, whispering about curses and angry spirits. But no one went near the river. And no one checked on Amarachi. Tied to her tree, she stared into the crimson current. The water moved differently now, swirling in patterns that looked almost like words. Then she saw her mother. Obiagelu rose from the red water, her wrapper still clinging to her body. But her mouth was stitched shut with silver thread, and her hands were bound behind her back, just as the mad woman had said. Her mother's eyes spoke what her mouth couldn't. They killed me. And they will kill you too. Amarachi tried to scream, but only muffled sounds escaped. The vision lasted only moments before her mother sank back into the bloody water. The river returned to its normal color, but Amarachi understood now. Her mother hadn't drowned. She had been murdered. And the same people who killed Obiagelu were now trying to silence her daughter. As dawn broke on the third day, something impossible happened. The ropes binding Amarachi's wrists untied themselves. No human hands touched them. No knife cut them. They simply loosened and fell away, as if the knots had never existed. Amarachi pulled the cloth from her mouth and gasped for air. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from being bound so long. She stood on shaky legs and looked back at the village. Then she looked at the river. The water was rising, just slightly, as if responding to her freedom. She walked slowly back toward the village square, her feet barely making sound on the hard earth. Behind her, the river followed, its level continuing to rise inch by inch. People saw her coming and whispered among themselves. She was supposed to be weak, broken, silent. Instead, she moved like someone who had discovered her own power. The water kept rising. In her abandoned shrine, Mama Anwi poured palm wine on the dusty altar. She spoke to empty air, but her words carried weight. "The girl carries the river now," she said, her blind eyes reflecting light that wasn't there. "She has drunk from the source of truth." Her hands shook as she arranged cowrie shells in ancient patterns. She hadn't performed these rituals in years, but some knowledge never leaves. "When truth is gagged and tied to trees, justice becomes a flood," she continued. "And floods do not ask permission before they wash away lies." The ground trembled beneath her feet. Dust fell from the shrine's cracked walls. Outside, villagers noticed that the Ọma Mmiri was now flowing over its banks for the first time in living memory. But it flowed strangely, in directions that defied nature. It seemed to be searching for something. Or someone. Elder Nduka found a snake coiled on his sleeping mat that evening. Its eyes were the same color as the river water, deep blue-green and ancient. The snake raised its head and hissed one word. "Undo." Nduka grabbed his machete and swung at it wildly, but the blade passed through empty air. When he looked down, there was only his daughter's silver anklet on the mat, broken and bloody. The next morning, his daughter limped badly. When he asked what happened, she said she had no memory of hurting her foot. But Nduka knew. The spirits were sending him messages he could no longer ignore. He tried to eat breakfast, but every bite tasted like river water. He tried to drink palm wine, but it turned bitter in his mouth. Guilt was eating him from inside, but he had gone too far to confess now. Too many people would suffer if the truth came out. He decided to visit the other elders. Maybe together they could find a solution. The rain began that afternoon, but not from the sky. Water dripped from ceilings inside houses. It seeped through walls that had never leaked. It pooled under beds and in corners where no pipes ran. But the strange thing was, it only happened in the homes of those who had voted to punish Amarachi. The 3 women who had lied about her woke up to find their floors flooded. The elders' compounds filled with mysterious puddles. "The river is leaking into our lives," people whispered. Children started having dreams about fish swimming through their rooms. Women found their cooking pots filled with river water instead of the well water they had drawn. And always, the water tasted of secrets and lies. Mama Anwi nodded knowingly when she heard the reports. "Leaking water drowns faster than rushing floods," she said. It seeps into everything until there's nowhere left to hide. The annual Ọma festival was supposed to begin the following week. It was the village's most important celebration, honoring the river goddess with dances, songs, and offerings. But 3 days before the festival, everything began falling apart. The masquerade dancers said their costumes felt too heavy to lift. The drummers complained that their hands cramped whenever they tried to play. Even the head priest forgot the sacred songs he had known for 30 years. "We should postpone," suggested Elder Emeka nervously. "The spirits are angry," agreed Elder Okonkwo. "Something has disturbed the balance." Elder Nduka wanted to argue, but he couldn't deny what everyone could see. The village's spiritual harmony was broken. "Perhaps," Mama Anwi said when they finally asked her opinion, "the river has decided to speak for itself this year." The festival was cancelled for the first time in over a century. And that night, the water rose another foot. The breaking point came at midnight on a moonless night. The 3 women who had lied against Amarachi, Nkiru, Adiz, and Ugochi, began screaming at the exact same moment in their separate homes. They claimed their tongues were on fire. They rolled on the ground, clawing at their mouths, begging for water to cool the burning. But when they drank, the water turned to steam in their throats. By morning, all 3 had developed painful boils on their lips. They could barely speak above a whisper. Desperate and afraid, they gathered at the village square and confessed. "Elder Nduka paid us," Kira whispered through her swollen lips. "He said the girl knew too much," added Adiz, tears streaming down her face. "He told us she had to be stopped before she uncovered the truth about her mother," finished Ugochi. The crowd that gathered was shocked into silence. Then the angry murmurs began. What truth were they talking about? What had really happened to Obiagela 3 years ago? That week, the river began entering houses. Not dramatically, like a flood. Quietly, like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave. People woke up with wet feet. Cooking pots filled themselves overnight. Children found small fish swimming in their drinking gourds. One man woke up completely soaked, even though his roof had no holes. Another discovered catfish hiding under his bed, gasping for the water that somehow existed in his dry room. The gods were no longer being subtle about their displeasure. Families started leaving the village, afraid of what the spirits might do next. But those who had been part of the conspiracy found that their feet refused to carry them beyond the village boundaries. Every road led them back to the Ọma Mmiri River. Back to face what they had done. Amarachi took out her mother's broken mirror again. This time, the cracked glass rippled like water when she looked into it. Her reflection showed her standing by the river, but she was still in her hut. Then her mother's face appeared beside her own in the mirror. "Touch the glass?" Obiagela whispered from within the reflection. Amarachi hesitated, then pressed her palm against the cool surface. Her hand went through as if the mirror were made of water. Then her mother stepped through entirely. Not a ghost. Not a shadow. But a woman made of river water and righteous anger, as solid and real as the day she died. "My daughter," Obiagela said, embracing Amarachi with arms that smelled of rain and justice. "They thought water forgets. But water remembers everything." Together, they walked toward the village. Behind them, the river followed, no longer content to stay within its banks. Elder Nduka's roof collapsed that night, though no wind was blowing. He ran to the old shrine, hoping to make offerings, to appease whatever spirits he had angered. But the shrine crumbled at his approach, stones rolling away like they were fleeing from him. Desperate, he went to the other elders' houses, begging for help. But they were all falling sick, one by one. Fevers that wouldn't break. Coughs that brought up river water. By morning, the entire village had gathered in the square. They surrounded him with angry faces and demanding voices. "What did you do to her mother?" they shouted. "Why did you lie about Amarachi? What truth were you trying to hide?" Nduka's walking stick shook in his trembling hands. He had spent 3 years believing he could bury the truth deep enough that it would never surface. But truth, like water, always finds a way up. On the 7th night after Amarachi's release, the Ọma Mmiri River left its banks entirely. But it didn't crash or rush. It walked. The water moved like a living thing, flowing deliberately through the village paths. It surrounded Elder Nduka's compound completely, rising slowly around his house. Other homes remained untouched, even those just a few feet away. The water knew exactly where it needed to go. Nduka climbed onto his roof as his house began to sink into the earth. He could see his neighbors watching from their dry compounds, too afraid to help him. "Please!" he screamed. "I'll tell the truth. I'll confess everything." But the water continued rising until only the peak of his roof remained visible. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the water retreated to the river. Nduka's house was gone, swallowed by the earth as if it had never existed. By morning, a pool of crystal-clear water had appeared in the village square overnight. It glowed with a soft blue light that hurt no one's eyes but revealed everything clearly. Mama Amwi hobbled to the pool's edge, her blind eyes seeing more than anyone else's. "This is the judgment pool," she announced to the gathered crowd. "Let each person accused of lying step into the water. If they speak truth, the river will hold them up. If they lie, it will keep them forever." The remaining elders backed away from the pool. "We demand that Nduka confess what he did to Obiajulu," the people shouted. But Nduka was nowhere to be found. The pool bubbled impatiently. "Then we already know he was guilty," Mama Anwi said. "Water doesn't lie, even when men do." That afternoon, something beautiful began happening throughout the village. Young girls started carving names into clay pots, names of women who had been shamed, beaten, or silenced over the years. Women whose voices had been stolen by powerful men. They broke each pot ceremonially at the riverbank, and with each breaking, the water flowed cleaner and clearer. "For every woman who was never believed," they chanted. "For every girl who was told to be quiet. For every mother whose truth was buried." The river sang as the pottery shattered, carrying the names and memories downstream to join with larger waters, where they would never be forgotten again. Amarachi watched from the bank, her mother's spirit standing beside her, finally at peace. Elder Nduka appeared at Amarachi's door 3 days later, sick and gaunt. His hair had turned completely white, and his hands shook uncontrollably. He fell to his knees in her doorway. "I killed your mother," he whispered, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. "She discovered my secret, the money I was stealing from the village treasury. She threatened to tell everyone unless I confessed." Amarachi said nothing, but listened. "I couldn't let her destroy my reputation. So I had her tied and thrown into the river during the night. We told everyone she drowned by accident." As soon as the words left his mouth, rain began falling. But only on him. He was soaked within seconds while Amarachi remained completely dry. "The water has waited 3 years to hear you confess," she said quietly. "Now it can rest." That night, Amarachi dreamed of the river goddess herself. The woman was tall and beautiful, with skin like polished river stones and hair that flowed like water. She wore the blue-green of deep river pools and spoke with the voice of every stream that had ever run. "You were the vessel," the goddess said. "The mouth that spoke when others were silent. The mirror that reflected truth when men preferred lies." Amarachi woke, with a silver mark shaped like a fish on her right palm. Wherever she walked now, mosquitoes would not bite her. And when liars tried to speak in her presence, their words would stick in their throats. She had become something more than human, a bridge between the world of water and the world of people. The village built a new shrine to replace the one that had crumbled. But this one was different. It honored daughters. It honored memory. It honored the voices of women who had been silenced. Mama Anwi, her sight mysteriously restored, led the dedication ceremony. Amarachi walked beside her, not as a victim, but as Omamu, the reborn one. Young girls from neighboring villages came to learn from them. They learned that their voices mattered. They learned that truth, even when buried, would always find a way to surface. And they learned that some things, like water and justice, could not be stopped by the lies of powerful men. Today, the Ọma Mmiri River flows peacefully past the village again. Fish have returned to its waters. Birds sing in the trees along its banks. But at the bend where Obiagelo was murdered, the water never ripples. It stays perfectly still and clear, like a mirror reflecting the sky. The villagers say it's a reminder. Others say it's a promise. Children are taught never to lie while standing near that spot, because the water remembers everything. And if people ever tried to silence the innocent again, if they ever tried to bury truth beneath lies and power, the river will rise once more. Some things should never be forgotten. Some voices should never be silenced. And some waters run too deep to ever truly rest. The river watches. The river remembers. And the river protects those who speak truth, no matter how powerful their enemies might be. Now you know why the people of our village always listen when the young ones speak. Because one girl heard the river's call. One girl unbound her voice. And when water speaks, even fire bows down to listen.